The certified letter arrived on September 10th, demanding that I mulch all fallen leaves by October 1st or face fines starting at $500 per day. And I knew right then that Patricia Henderson had finally found her next crusade against me. I stood in my driveway in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, watching the first few leaves drift down from the massive oak trees lining my property on Riverside Court. The trees were easily 100 years old, magnificent specimens that dropped enough leaves each autumn to fill a dozen contractor bags. My name is Quentin Jacobson, and I had been living peacefully in this neighborhood for 3 years before Patricia took over as HOA president 6 months ago. Since then, my life had become a bureaucratic nightmare. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with a gold seal that Patricia had commissioned herself. I read through the demands again, noting the specific language about mulching versus bagging, the timeline, and the threat of escalating fines. What caught my attention most was a clause buried in the middle about maintaining proper drainage flow throughout the community. Apparently, the HOA had upgraded the storm drainage system last spring, installing new catch basins and underground pipes that ran beneath several properties, including mine. I walked back inside my modest 3-bedroom ranch house and tossed the letter onto my kitchen counter. My phone rang almost immediately. It was my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who lived 2 houses down. "Did you get the mulching letter?" he asked without preamble. "Just read it." "This is insane, Frank. October 1st, most of the leaves have not even fallen yet." "I know." I called Patricia to ask about it, and she said the new drainage system cannot handle whole leaves. They need to be mulched into fine particles, or they will clog everything up. Frank sounded exhausted. "She fined the Robertsons last week because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black." "The wrong shade of black," I repeated, incredulous. Apparently, it was supposed to be midnight black, not carbon black. $200 fine. I ended the call and did something I rarely did. I pulled out the HOA covenant documents, all 73 pages of them. I spent the next 2 hours reading every word, every clause, every amendment that had been added over the community's 15-year history. What I discovered was interesting. The mulching requirement that Patricia cited in her letter referenced Section 12.4 of the updated covenants, which had been voted on and approved in March. However, the vote had been rushed through during a meeting that only 8 of the 42 homeowners had attended. Patricia had called it an emergency session due to the drainage system installation. The more I read, the more a plan began forming in my mind. Section 12.4 stated that leaves must be mulched to prevent drainage issues. It did not specify when the leaves had to be mulched, only that they needed to be mulched before they could potentially cause drainage problems. The October 1st deadline was Patricia's interpretation, not what the actual covenant stated. I decided to consult a lawyer. On September 12th, I drove to downtown Cleveland and met with Robert Chen, an attorney who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in a renovated building near Public Square, and he listened carefully as I explained the situation. "Let me see if I understand correctly," Robert said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The HOA president is demanding you mulch leaves by October 1st, but most of those leaves have not fallen yet." "Exactly. And the actual covenant does not specify October 1st. That is Patricia's addition." Robert reviewed the documents I had brought. "You are right. The covenant says leaves must be mulched to prevent drainage issues, but it does not mandate a specific date. However, here is the problem. If you do nothing and the drainage system fails, they could argue you violated the spirit of the rule. What if I mulched the leaves after they fell but before any drainage issues occurred? That would technically comply with the covenant. But I can see where this is heading, Quentin. If you are thinking about malicious compliance, you need to be very careful. You cannot intentionally cause damage to community property. I left Robert's office with a strategy in mind, though not the one he might have expected. I was not planning to cause damage. I was planning to prove a point about Patricia's mismanagement and overreach. September progressed with its usual rhythm. The weather in Cleveland that year was particularly warm, which meant the leaves were taking their time turning colors and falling. By September 25th, my yard had perhaps 10% of the total leaf coverage it would eventually accumulate. I raked nothing. I mulched nothing. I simply waited. Patricia noticed, of course. On September 27th, she appeared at my door at 7 in the morning. She was a woman in her early 50s, with severely cut blonde hair and a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore a pantsuit despite the weekend and carried a tablet computer that she used to document violations. "Quentin, I can see you have not begun mulching," she said without greeting. "Good morning, Patricia. You are right. Most of my leaves have not fallen yet. The deadline is October 1st. That gives you 4 days. The deadline you imposed gives me 4 days," I corrected. "The actual covenant says I need to mulch leaves to prevent drainage problems. Since most of my leaves are still on the trees, I cannot mulch them yet." Her face reddened. "The covenant clearly states that all fallen leaves must be processed by October 1st to prevent the accumulation that causes drainage issues. Can you show me where it says October 1st in the covenant?" I asked calmly. She tapped her tablet. "It is in the updated guidelines." "Guidelines are not covenants, Patricia. They do not have the same legal weight." "I will fine you starting October 2nd if those leaves are not mulched," she said sharply, then turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. October 1st came and went. About 20% of my leaves had fallen, and I had not touched them. True to her word, on October 2nd, I received a citation for $500. I did not pay it. Instead, I sent a formal dispute letter citing the exact covenant language and requesting a hearing before the HOA board. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th at the community center, a small building near the entrance of our subdivision. The board consisted of Patricia as president, Tom Winters as vice president, Susan Delgado as treasurer, and 2 members at large, Marie Patterson and David Kim. I arrived with my folder of documents and a confident demeanor. Patricia called the meeting to order with all the self-importance of a Supreme Court justice. "We are here to address Quentin Jacobson's dispute of his fines for failure to comply with leaf management requirements." I presented my case methodically. I showed them the covenant language, pointed out the lack of a specific date, and explained that demanding leaves be mulched before they fell was unreasonable. Tom and David seemed to follow my logic. Marie looked uncertain. Susan appeared to be firmly in Patricia's camp. "The intent of the rule is clear," Patricia argued. "Waiting until all leaves have fallen and then mulching creates a dangerous accumulation period where drainage problems can occur. The October 1st deadline ensures compliance before the peak leaf season. Then the covenant should be amended to state that clearly," I countered. "As written, I am in compliance as long as I mulch the leaves before they cause drainage issues." The board voted 3-2 to uphold the fine. Patricia, Susan, and Marie voted against me. Tom and David voted in my favor. I was not surprised, but I was prepared for the next step. "I am appealing this decision and requesting mediation as allowed under Ohio HOA law," I stated formally. "Additionally, I am putting the board on notice that I will mulch my leaves when I determine the timing is appropriate to prevent drainage issues, which will be after the majority of leaves have fallen." Patricia's expression was ice cold. "The fines will continue to accumulate daily, Quentin. You are making a very expensive mistake." October continued its march toward winter. By mid-October, about 50% of my leaves had fallen, creating a substantial coverage across my half-acre lot. My lawn was invisible beneath a carpet of brown, gold, and red. I did nothing. The leaves piled deeper. $500 in fines per day added up quickly on paper, though I had no intention of ever paying them. My neighbors had mixed reactions. Frank supported me quietly, having grown tired of Patricia's authoritarian streak. The Richardsons, 3 houses down, thought I was being stubborn for no good reason. The elderly couple next door, the Washingtons, just wanted peace and stayed out of it entirely. What I was really watching, though, was the weather and the drainage system. Cleveland in late October meant rain, and we got plenty of it that year. The new drainage system that Patricia was so proud of consisted of catch basins installed at the corners of various properties, with underground pipes channeling water to the main storm sewers on Riverside Court and the adjacent streets. My property sat at a slight elevation, with natural water flow moving from my backyard toward the street. On October 20th, we got our first major rainstorm, nearly 3 inches in 12 hours. I watched from my window as water flowed through my yard and toward the street catch basin. The leaves, thick and matted now, created small dams and diversions, but the water still found its way through. The drainage system handled it fine. Patricia drove by twice that day, slowing down to observe my property. I waved to her the second time. She did not wave back. By November 1st, approximately 90% of my leaves had fallen. My property looked like an autumn wonderland, if wonderlands involved leaf depths of 6 to 8 inches. The fines on paper had reached $15,500. Patricia sent me a registered letter threatening a lien on my property if I did not pay and comply immediately. I responded through Robert Chen, my attorney, with a formal letter stating that I intended to mulch all leaves by November 15th, well before any drainage issues could occur, and that all fines were disputed and would not be paid pending resolution of the underlying covenant interpretation question. The second major storm hit on November 7th. This one was bigger, nearly 5 inches of rain over 2 days. Cleveland was soaked, and the temperatures had dropped enough that we were flirting with the first snow of the season mixed into the rain. This is when things got interesting. The storm drains in our neighborhood began to back up. Not mine specifically, but several others. Water pooled in the street near the Hendersons' house, which was 3 blocks away from me. The catch basin at the corner of Riverside Court and Maple Street overflowed, flooding the Johnsons' front yard. By the second day of the storm, 4 properties had standing water, and the emergency management crews were out assessing the situation. Patricia, predictably, blamed me. She sent a mass email to all HOA members stating that the drainage failures were directly caused by my refusal to mulch leaves, which had apparently washed into the system and created clogs. She demanded an emergency assessment to cover the repair costs and stated that she would be pursuing legal action against me for damages. I was not worried because I had been smart. On November 1st, anticipating exactly this scenario, I had hired a professional photographer to document my property and the drainage patterns. The photos clearly showed that while my leaves were deep, they were not migrating off my property in any significant way. The natural slope of my land and the gravel border I had installed along my property line kept the leaves contained. More importantly, when the city crews investigated the drainage problems, they discovered something Patricia had not anticipated. The new drainage system she had championed had been installed incorrectly. The contractor had used pipes with inadequate diameter for the water volume, and several of the catch basins had been placed at the wrong grade, creating natural collection points for debris. The leaves clogging the system were not from my property at all. They were from the communal green spaces that the HOA was responsible for maintaining, areas that had not been cleaned since late September. The city inspector's report was damning. I obtained a copy through a public records request on November 10th. It detailed multiple installation defects, improper permits, and inadequate maintenance of HOA common areas. The report specifically noted that the drainage failures were systemic design and installation issues, not related to individual property leaf management. Armed with this report, I attended the emergency HOA meeting on November 12th. The community center was packed. Every homeowner affected by the flooding was there, along with many others who had heard about the disaster through the neighborhood grapevine. Patricia tried to control the meeting from the start. "We are here to discuss the drainage crisis caused by willful negligence of HOA rules. As you all know, Quentin Jacobson has refused to comply with leaf management requirements, resulting in thousands of dollars in damage and repair costs." I stood up before she could continue. "I have copies of the city inspector's report for anyone who wants one." I held up a stack of papers. The drainage failures were caused by defective installation of the system itself, not by my leaves or anyone else's leaves. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia tried to talk over the noise, but people were already coming to take copies of the report. Frank grabbed one and started reading aloud the section about improper pipe diameter. "This is selective interpretation," Patricia insisted. "The system would have worked fine if proper leaf management had been followed." Tom Winters, the vice president, looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, if the system was installed wrong, that is on us, not on Quentin. Who vetted this contractor?" "I did," Susan Delgado, the treasurer, said quietly. "Patricia wanted the project done quickly and this company offered the best price." "Best price from whom?" someone called out. "Did you get multiple bids?" The meeting devolved from there. It came out that Patricia had pushed for a single contractor without proper competitive bidding. The contractor was owned by her brother-in-law. The system had cost $80,000, paid from HOA reserves and a special assessment. And now the repairs were going to cost at least another $40,000. David Kim, one of the board members who had voted in my favor before, stood up. "I move that we suspend all fines against Quentin Jacobson pending a full review of the drainage situation and the covenant requirements. I also move that we initiate an independent audit of the drainage system project, including all contracts and payments." The motion was seconded immediately by another homeowner. Patricia tried to rule it out of order, but Tom Winters overruled her. "We need to vote on this, Patricia. All in favor?" The room was overwhelmingly in favor. Even Marie Patterson and Susan Delgado voted yes, probably sensing which way the wind was blowing. I left that meeting with my fines suspended, and a neighborhood full of people who were suddenly very interested in how Patricia had been running the HOA. But I was not done yet. I still had a point to prove about the leaf management rule itself. On November 14th, the day before my self-imposed deadline, I rented a commercial leaf mulcher and spent 8 hours processing every single leaf on my property. The machine was loud, powerful, and efficient. By the end of the day, I had reduced 6 inches of whole leaves to a fine mulch that I spread across my lawn as natural fertilizer. My property looked immaculate. I took photographs of the completed work, and sent them to the HOA board with a note stating that I had completed leaf mulching in compliance with covenant requirements, and well before any drainage issues could occur on my property. I also noted that the drainage problems in the neighborhood had occurred on properties that had been in full compliance with Patricia's October 1st deadline, further proving that her interpretation of the rules had been both wrong and irrelevant to the actual issues. The next 2 weeks were quiet on the HOA front, but busy behind the scenes. The independent audit that the homeowners had demanded was moving forward, and it was uncovering serious problems. The contractor who had installed the drainage system was indeed Patricia's brother-in-law, Jason Markham. The contract had been awarded without competitive bidding, in violation of HOA bylaws that required at least 3 bids for any project over $10,000. Worse, the audit revealed that Jason's company had been paid the full $80,000 even though the materials and work performed should have cost closer to $50,000 based on market rates. On December 1st, the HOA board held another meeting. This time, Patricia was not running it. Tom Winters had assumed control as acting president after the other board members voted to suspend Patricia's authority pending investigation. The community center was packed again. Tom got right to the point. The audit has revealed significant financial irregularities and violations of our bylaws. Patricia Henderson awarded a contract to her brother-in-law without proper bidding, potentially costing the HOA $30,000 in overpayments. Additionally, the work was not performed to code, resulting in the drainage failures we have all dealt with. Patricia sat in the front row, her face pale but her expression defiant. The contract was awarded in good faith. Jason's company was qualified and the pricing was competitive based on his estimate. Based on his estimate alone, Tom corrected. You did not get competing estimates. That is the problem. A homeowner in the back stood up. Are we going to get our money back? I had $2,000 in water damage to my basement. The HOA is pursuing legal action against the contractor, Tom said. We have also filed a claim with our liability insurance. But I am going to be honest with everyone. This is going to take time and we may not recover everything. The room erupted in angry voices. People demanded accountability. Several homeowners called for Patricia's immediate removal from the board. The vote was not even close. Patricia was removed as president by a vote of 38-4, and then removed from the board entirely by a similar margin. Susan Delgado, who had supported Patricia throughout, resigned rather than face a similar vote. But the story did not end there, because some of the homeowners were not satisfied with just removing Patricia from power. Frank Morrison, who had been quietly gathering evidence, stood up near the end of the meeting. I think we need to involve law enforcement, Frank said. I have been reviewing the HOA financial records, and I found something disturbing. Patricia authorized 3 payments to Jason Markham's company. The first was for $40,000 in April, which was the down payment. The second was for $40,000 in June, which was supposed to be the final payment upon completion. But there was a third payment in August for $15,000, listed as additional materials and labor. Tom looked confused. I do not remember approving a third payment. You did not, Frank said. Patricia approved it unilaterally, claiming it was under the threshold that required board approval. But according to our bylaws, any additional payment beyond the original contract requires board approval regardless of amount. And here is the interesting part. I called Jason's company to ask what the $15,000 was for. They have no record of it. The room went silent. Even Patricia looked shocked, though I could not tell if it was genuine surprise or panic at being caught. Are you saying Patricia embezzled $15,000? Marie Patterson asked quietly. I am saying the HOA paid $15,000 for work that apparently was never done, and I think the police should investigate where that money went, Frank said. Tom looked overwhelmed but determined. I am going to contact the Shaker Heights Police Department tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I am freezing all HOA accounts and changing all passwords and access permissions. The meeting adjourned in chaos. I approached Frank afterward. How long have you known about the third payment? About a week, he admitted. I wanted to have my facts straight before I said anything publicly. I also wanted Patricia removed from any position of power before dropping this bomb. Do you think she actually stole the money? Frank shrugged. Either she did, or her brother-in-law did and she covered for him. Either way, it is fraud. The Shaker Heights Police Department took the matter seriously. Detective Sarah Martinez was assigned to the case and began interviewing board members, reviewing financial records, and tracing the payment. On December 8th, she showed up at my door to ask questions about my interactions with Patricia and my perspective on the HOA's operations. I understand you had a significant dispute with Mrs. Henderson about leaf management, Detective Martinez said as we sat in my living room. That is right. She was fining me for not mulching leaves by an arbitrary deadline that was not actually in our covenants. Did she ever ask you for money? Any kind of payment to make the fines go away? I shook my head. No, nothing like that. She was definitely on a power trip, but I never got any sense of financial corruption from her personally. She just seemed to enjoy the authority. What about her relationship with the drainage contractor? I did not know about her brother-in-law connection until it came out at the meeting. But in retrospect, she was very defensive of the project and refused to acknowledge any problems with it, even when the failures were obvious. Detective Martinez thanked me for my time and left. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded. Police executed a search warrant on Patricia's home and seized financial records. They also searched Jason Markham's business and personal records. The truth came out just before Christmas. Patricia and Jason had indeed conspired to defraud the HOA. The scheme worked like this. Jason's company submitted an inflated bid of $80,000 for work that should have cost $50,000. Patricia ensured no competitive bids were solicited. Jason performed the work but used cheap materials and cut corners, actually spending only about $35,000. The initial profit of $45,000 was split between them, but they got greedy. The third payment of $15,000 was entirely fraudulent. Jason submitted a false invoice for additional work that was never performed. Patricia approved it without board oversight, and they split that money as well. In total, they had stolen approximately $60,000 from the HOA through a combination of overcharging and fake invoicing. On December 21st, Patricia Henderson and Jason Markham were arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges were serious, Class 3 felonies that carried potential prison time of up to 5 years. The neighborhood watched with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief as Patricia was led from her house in handcuffs. Her husband, Richard, who apparently had no knowledge of the scheme, filed for divorce within a week. The criminal case moved through the system quickly. Both Patricia and Jason's attorneys advised them to accept plea deals rather than risk trial. In February, they both pleaded guilty to reduce charges. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Jason received a similar sentence. The HOA's insurance and the recovered funds eventually covered most of the repair costs for the drainage system, which was properly rebuilt by a reputable contractor in the spring. As for me, I never paid a penny in fines. The new HOA board, led by Tom Winters, formally rescinded all penalties against me and issued a written apology. More importantly, they hired an attorney to review and revise all the covenants and rules, removing vague language and eliminating arbitrary deadlines that had no basis in actual property management needs. The leaf management rule was rewritten to say simply that homeowners should maintain their properties in a manner that prevents debris from migrating onto neighboring properties or into drainage systems. No specific dates, no mandated methods, just common sense maintenance standards. I could live with that. The following autumn, when the leaves began to fall again, I found myself thinking about the whole ordeal as I worked in my yard. Patricia had tried to use a petty rule to assert dominance and authority, but her inflexibility and corruption had ultimately been her downfall. If she had simply been reasonable, if she had worked with homeowners instead of against them, if she had not been stealing from the very community she claimed to protect, she would probably still be HOA president, living her comfortable life in Shaker Heights. Instead, she was in prison, divorced, and facing financial ruin from the restitution payments. Her brother-in-law's business had collapsed, and he was in prison alongside her, and all because they got greedy over a neighborhood HOA fund. I mulched my leaves in mid-November that year, after most of them had fallen. No one said a word. No citations, no fines, no threatening letters. Just a quiet neighborhood going about its business, governed by a reasonable board that understood the difference between necessary rules and arbitrary power grabs. Frank Morrison was elected to the HOA board in the next election. He ran on a platform of transparency and accountability, and won in a landslide. He made sure the board meetings were properly noticed, that all financial decisions were documented and voted on openly, and that homeowners had a real voice in the community's governance. The drainage system worked perfectly after the proper repairs were completed. Turned out that, when you installed pipes of adequate size at the correct grade, and when you maintained common areas properly, the system could handle normal leaf accumulation just fine. Who knew? I ran into Richard Henderson, Patricia's ex-husband, at the grocery store in March. He looked tired but relieved. "I just wanted to say thank you," he told me, "for not backing down to her." "I was just protecting my property rights," I said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "No, you did more than that. You exposed what she was doing. I had no idea about any of it, about the stealing or the corruption. I thought she was just really into the HOA." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out she was into it for the wrong reasons." "How are you doing?" I asked. "Better than I expected. The divorce is almost final. I am keeping the house and I am not liable for her restitution, thank God. It is weird, you know. 23 years of marriage and I did not really know her at all." We talked for a few more minutes, then parted ways. I felt bad for Richard. He had been collateral damage in Patricia's quest for authority and money. The civil lawsuit that several homeowners had filed against Patricia and Jason moved forward separately from the criminal case. The plaintiffs were the 4 families whose properties had been damaged by the drainage failures. They were seeking actual damages for repairs, plus punitive damages for the negligent installation. The insurance company was defending the HOA itself, but Patricia and Jason were on their own. That case settled in April for an undisclosed amount, though Frank heard through his lawyer connections that it was substantial enough that Patricia would be making payments for the rest of her life, even after she got out of prison. Life in the neighborhood returned to normal, or at least to a new normal. The HOA learned to function as it should have all along, as a minimal administrative body that maintained common areas, enforced reasonable rules, and stayed out of homeowners' hair as much as possible. It was not exciting, but it was peaceful and functional. I continued living in my house on Riverside Court, enjoying my massive oak trees and the beautiful leaves they produced each fall. I invested in my own professional-grade leaf mulcher, so I would never have to rent one again. It sat in my garage, a reminder of the autumn when I stood my ground against an unreasonable demand and accidentally uncovered a criminal conspiracy. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had just complied with Patricia's October 1st deadline. Would she and Jason have continued their fraud indefinitely? Would they have gotten even greedier, stolen even more? Or would they have eventually been caught anyway through some other means? I like to think that my resistance mattered, that standing up to unreasonable authority served a purpose beyond just my own property rights. But maybe that was self-serving rationalization. Maybe Patricia was always going to implode under the weight of her own corruption and arrogance. Maybe I was just the catalyst, not the cause. Either way, the outcome was the same. A corrupt HOA president went to prison, a fraudulent contractor lost his business and his freedom, and a neighborhood learned the importance of oversight and accountability in community governance. The following summer, the HOA organized a community barbecue, the first social event in years that was actually about bringing neighbors together rather than enforcing rules. I attended with potato salad I had made the night before. Frank was there with his wife. Tom Winters manned the grill. The Washingtons from next door brought their famous peach cobbler. Even the Richardsons, who had thought I was being unreasonably stubborn, came over to chat and apologize for not understanding what I was really fighting against. It was a good day, sunny and warm, with none of the tension and conflict that had defined the neighborhood for so long under Patricia's reign. Kids played in the common area green space. Adults laughed and told stories. For a few hours, we were just neighbors, not homeowners bound by covenants and threatened by fines. As the sun set and people began packing up to head home, Tom pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said, "for pushing back against Patricia's nonsense. If you had just paid the fines and given in, we might never have questioned anything she was doing." "I was just being stubborn," I said with a smile. "I hate being told what to do, especially when it does not make sense." "Well, your stubbornness saved this neighborhood, so thank you." I walked home that evening feeling content in a way I had not felt in years. My house, my property, my trees, my leaves, all of it was mine to manage as I saw fit within reasonable bounds. No arbitrary deadlines, no power-hungry board president, no threatening letters. Just peace, quiet, and the freedom to live my life without unnecessary interference. It seemed like such a small thing, such a basic expectation, but as I had learned, it was worth fighting for. Patricia Henderson was released from prison in August after serving 14 months with good behavior. She moved out of state, to somewhere in Florida according to rumors. I never saw her again, though I heard she had to register with some kind of fraud offender database that prevented her from serving on any corporate or nonprofit boards for 10 years. Jason Markham served his full 18 months and got out a few months after Patricia. His contractor's license was permanently revoked, and he ended up working as a warehouse supervisor somewhere in Akron. His wife stayed with him, unlike Patricia's husband, though their business and savings were wiped out by the restitution and legal fees. I thought about them sometimes, wondering if they felt remorse or just regret at getting caught. Did Patricia understand that her need for control and her willingness to steal had destroyed her life? Did Jason realize that $30,000 of fraud had cost him his business, his reputation, and more than a year of freedom. But mostly, I did not think about them at all. They were a chapter of neighborhood history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of community vigilance. The new HOA board used their story as a teaching moment, implementing new checks and balances to prevent any single board member from having too much unilateral power. 2 years after the whole mess began, in the autumn that would have been my 5th in the neighborhood, I stood in my yard watching the leaves begin their annual transformation. The oak trees were as magnificent as ever, their canopy a riot of gold and crimson against the October sky. In a few weeks, those leaves would fall, and I would mulch them when the time was right, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was good property management. The drainage system, properly installed and maintained, would handle whatever debris made its way into the catch basins. The neighborhood would continue its quiet existence, governed by reasonable rules enforced by reasonable people. And I would live in peace, secure in the knowledge that standing up for principle, even over something as simple as when to mulch leaves, was worthwhile. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Board meeting tonight, just routine budget stuff. Want to come watch democracy in action?" I smiled and texted back, "Sure, I will bring coffee." Because that was the thing about good HOA governance. It was boring. It was routine. It was transparent and accountable and utterly unremarkable. And that was exactly how it should be. As I headed inside to get ready for the meeting, I took one last look at my yard, at the leaves just beginning to fall, at the property I had fought to manage on my own reasonable terms. The autumn sun was setting, painting everything in warm orange light. It was perfect.